Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
And a very good evening to you. This is Newsline Prime. We are live from the Newsfirst studios in Dawson Street in Colombo. And what a day it has been. Politically speaking, a huge day. And the weather's held up too. But the main news, the talk of the town, the talk of the nation, really is what went on at the Grand Old Party's headquarters today, the United National Party's headquarters at Srikota, where presidential candidate was announced, Sajid Premadasa, giving in to a huge call, almost a natural call for Sajid Premadasa to be named as the candidate of the United National Party and its partners for the forthcoming presidential election. To comment on that and a bit more, we've got live in the studio Mr. Iran Vikramaratne. Very good evening to you, Mr. Vikramaratne, and
good evening.
Thank you very much for being on Newsline Prime today. You've come straight from Srikota.
That's right.
The traffic has held and helped you. So, how do you feel today?
Good evening to everyone. Today was in a sense, a culmination of a process we started some time ago, and I would call it a successful culmination. That is in formalizing Sajid Premadasa as a presidential candidate of the United National Party, and then of course it will become the candidate of the United National Front. So I think it's a happy moment for, I think, millions of people around the country who are actually asking for his candidature.
So it appears to me, following the news and the press and so on, following it, it appears to me that the announcement of Sajid Premadasa as the candidate of the UNP has been more than a fresh breath of fresh air. It's been invigorating, and do you think it has rejuvenated your party?
Certainly it has, for different reasons, and one of the reasons I think is that it's a leadership, a new face he's a new face, though he's been in politics a while, right? He's kind of come right to the top, becoming the presidential candidate. It's, I would say, a new generation, a younger person who has come into politics. And when you see Sajid and his wife together, right, also it shows that there is a generational shift, you see, that has happened. And I think that the world is changing so fast, you see, and in lots of countries you find younger leaders who emerged. South Asia is a little different, but most of the world. And I think it's a big change.
Indeed. And I think we, as in Sri Lanka, needs to stand up really and applaud the United National Party for having been bold to break away from this old fossil leadership to a leadership of youth, because at 52, Sajid Premadasa can't be considered by any stretch of anyone's imagination to be an old fossil, but he's young, and so that's a marked change. And as you say, South Asia is lagging behind in this youthful leadership. How much do you think his age, his youthfulness, is going to help the UNP in its campaign?
I think it will help the UNP in its campaign, and the other reason I think so is that he's new. People know Sajid Premadasa only as Minister of Housing for what he has done. He is very popular among the rural masses of the country for what he has done. But I think there are lots of new voters out there, right? Maybe 15, 16, 17 lakhs of voters, right, out there. And they are going to get to know Sajid Premadasa in this campaign. Sajid is just like you, those people I referred to. At that young age, right, he had an education in this country, he had an education overseas, then he went to university overseas. He's a very globalized person, I heard someone say the other day, meaning about 2-3 months ago, can you speak English? And I was quite amazed at the statement, and it just showed that there was a gap, because they knew him as a Minister of Housing, and he was building thousands of houses around the country. He identifies very, very closely with the poor. He understands their heartthrob, but also he is modern, he is new. He has been exposed just like those young people out there. And the other remarkable thing is, people like Sajid, I can identify with him. I was studying myself abroad, but there's one thing that our parents brainwashed us with. My mother certainly brainwashed me, and she said, it doesn't matter where you go to study, it doesn't matter what exposure you get, you're born in this country with a purpose, you return here. I was told that, my siblings were told that. We came back, we never even entertained the idea that we will live overseas or even take a citizenship overseas. None of us in our family did it. Sajid had that opportunity. But no, Sajid's father showed the way, Sajid's mom, they drilled those things into him. That, there's a purpose, right? We're not born here by accident. Some of us might have more opportunity than others, right? But even if you have the opportunity, you'd basically give back. There's a purpose why you are born here, and I think Sajid is full of that.
And also, sorry to interrupt you, but I think it's worth bearing in mind that after the awful events that took that very popular president's life, President Premadas's life, his wife, Hema Premadasa, continued to live in this country, as she so does even today. And I'm sure she could have found it better, and she would have had a very valid reason that, her husband was killed in an assassination bid. But yet she has been here.
Yes, President Premadasa, there are people who adore him, there are people who look at some of the mistakes in his presidency. Every leader, you see, there are successors, and some people would sometimes criticize some of the actions. But the significant thing about President Premadasa is he came from very, very humble beginnings, born in the city of Colombo. Somebody actually told this story to me firsthand. This story was said to me. Right, just opposite Sucharita, there is a printing press, and the people who owned it once told me, but this was about 25 years ago, how he used to be sitting out there and, with all the boys, and one day the gentleman, the owner of the printing press, called him in and said, call your mother, I need to speak to her. And then when the mother came, said, send your child across, he can study here. He came later and said that he wanted to run for the Colombo Municipal Council. Those people got together, they helped him. In fact, in their office, they provided an office for him. Later he came and said, I want to run for Parliament, and they helped him. And then the story is known throughout the country, from very humble beginnings. But the thing about President Premadasa is there was a philosophy behind it. And the philosophy was, right, that it doesn't matter where you're born. You can be born a Sinhalese home, a Tamil home, a Muslim home, Burgher home, it doesn't really matter. Your caste doesn't really matter, you see. Your class doesn't really matter. He really propounded, if you want, a philosophy that everybody should be equal, everybody should be given an opportunity. Sajid is not born, obviously, to the same background. That was what President Premadasa was born to. Sajid was actually born to a very successful politician, and Sajid had the opportunity to choose otherwise, unlike President Premadasa. You say Sajid had the opportunity of living in another country, like I, myself, we studied, getting a dual citizenship in another country, living there, taking care of our families. But no such thing, you see. We don't have any of that. As I like to call it, we are brainwashed in a sense.
Yeah.
But we feel this is our place, this is the place for our children. And we are in politics, and I want to say this to the middle classes of this country. We are in politics to create a better society here, and that drives me every day. I feel that our children should have a better future here. It's not a future where you go abroad and you work in London or in New York or some other place, right? And then you're hauled into a professional life. At the end of it, what do you have? You have a washing machine. You have a mortgage on a house. You have a car that you will buy. It's all materially based. And then what happens, one day you get a phone call, and the phone call says your mother is dead or your father is dead. And the conversation goes like, oh, I will need 2 days to get there or whatever. That is the story of many families. That is the Sri Lanka we don't want. Sajid wants to change that. People like myself want to help him to change it, create a better future for everybody living in this country, and particularly for the professional classes of this country as well, that they have an opportunity here. This is our country. It's not about economics only. It's about family. It's about family and it's about community.
And on Newsline Prime, as we do on Newsline, we encourage you to send us your questions live straight through to the studio, and the card should be coming up on your screens. It's just done. 0772 300 305 by SMS only, please. And of course, we are in conversation with Mr. Eran Wickramaratne. That's absolutely true what you say. But the brain drain actually has been created because of an acute lack of opportunity in this country. There simply aren't enough opportunities, and that's why we've had this brain drain. We've had successive governments pursuing a policy of exporting our workers to the Middle East and so on. So much so that foreign exchange remittances from our expatriate citizens amounts to, I think, the second largest number in the country. And that itself has its own social challenges and so on. And so it leads me to my question, what concrete plans does the Sajid Premadasa Team Premadasa have to address these issues? Primarily, I would aver to say that the economy is in dire straits. And do you have a plan? Have you sat down? Have you had the time to do it? Because the biggest challenge seems to have been to have the candidacy announced. So,
thank you, Faraz, for asking that question. You say yes, of course. It took a lot of effort, to getting the candidacy formalized and announced and all that. But I must say that while we were doing that, we were also doing a lot of planning. We have been doing a lot of planning. We have had teams of academics and professionals set over about 3 months, right? And some were assisting Sajid Premadasa, advising him, assisting, writing papers. And then I have had the opportunity of actually meeting with some of these people. I've at the moment collated the papers, looked at them. Then we are also got access to other information. Others have also done plans. Even some of the other opposition candidates have put forward plans which we are looking at. And the Chamber of Commerce also had put forward a plan. It was more interventions and then actions need to be taken. So we're having a very comprehensive look at all of these plans and seeing, because these are, it's about what will work, what should we do. I would say it in a nutshell like this. In the past 5 years, we inherited an economy which had a lot of debt. We inherited an economy, which had in 1997, Sri Lanka had moved from a low-income country to a middle-income country. And when you move from a low-income country to a middle-income country, you lose all the, if you want, the windows of getting funding, grants, and things at concessionary rates. And then you go into a market. And then what had happened by 2014, 15, we were borrowing heavily we were borrowing. Today, out of our foreign borrowings, about 50% is at market rates, or if you can say above market rates. So suddenly the country has become vulnerable. And we have also had the problem in the last term of office. They borrowed and they invested in non-tradables, in infrastructure and things, which don't give a return. Because if you get a return, you can keep servicing your debt. So the country was actually caught in if you want, in a debt trap. So what have we done in the last 5 years? We have tried to manage the economy, and we have gone essentially for a policy of fiscal consolidation. That means, you have your revenue or your income, and you have your expenditures, and then you have a budget deficit. We are trying to bring the budget deficit down. So on one hand, fiscal consolidation means you get more tax incomes by widening the base. So that's what has happened in the last 5 years. And over the last 2 years, there's a very positive thing, right? And this happened 63 years ago and 26 years ago, only twice, where we had a primary balance. A primary balance means your income in government is more than your expenditure in government. Only twice in 63 years. But in 2017 and in 2018, our income has been more than our expenditure. So yes, people have felt the pinch. I would admit that. People have felt the pinch. But we have gone for a policy of fiscal consolidation. Now here is the difference. I fully recognize, right, that has been a struggle for some industries and for manufacturing and for business. This is the switch that we will make under the Sajith Premadasa presidency. We are going to go for a strategy of growth over the next 5 years. So we are going to focus not just on fiscal consolidation, but Sri Lanka has two deficits, budget deficit, and it also has a trade deficit. That's when you look at imports and exports, your imports are big, your exports are lower, and there's a big deficit. So what are we going to do? We are going to go for a growth strategy. We are going to do everything that it takes for growth and also to increase our exports. That means when incentives are given, right, and when concessions are given, we are going to direct it so that businesses will grow and exports will grow. So from tax policy to incentives, that's a direction that we will take over the next 5 years. And then if the economy grows, I think naturally we can meet our other social obligations.
Thank you. You've given us, obviously, anyone listening to you, even if I hadn't heard of you, which is unlikely, will understand that you know a thing or two about economics. But just today, we were treated to some information that public sector salaries are going to go up between 3,000 and 14,000. How are you going to pay that?
Faraz, you're asking a very important question, right? And I think it's about not just about public sector salaries. It's about the public sector itself. A very important question, and that's something that we will take a very hard look at. In our planning, we are already doing that, and what we are doing it is we are looking at the public sector, right? If you look at the private sector and the public sector, there is a gap between the two, because if you look at service levels, if you look at efficiency, if you look at the management systems in the public sector, there's a huge gap and much to be desired. So it doesn't matter who is in government. If Sri Lanka is to advance further, the public sector needs to be looked at. No country will develop higher than its public sector. No country. Because the private sector, for it to develop, needs to sit across the table with the public sector. We should be speaking the same language, we should be having the same understanding to grow. So public sector reform. What's happening at the moment for us is unfortunate. What happens, when you get close to an election, you will have...
Well, isn't this exactly that?
This is what's happening. You will have trade union action, then the problems that have existed sometimes for over a long period of time, problems, they are brought to the forefront, and generally there's an attempt to get you to somehow or other resolve those issues before an election. This is the unfortunate side of democracy. But I want to say this, when the new president is in, we will look at public sector reform, and that will be one of our priorities. We need an efficient public sector. We need a public sector which is market remunerated, right? But not necessarily the numbers.
But surely we need it to be the public sector service to be lean and mean.
We need it lean, I agree with that, and then we have to find opportunities for those in other areas, and there are growing opportunities if the economy is growing and the private sector is growing. And the other big thing we need to do in the public sector is we need to invest heavily in training in the public sector, because when you sit across a table, right, when you sit across a table, we should be talking the same language.
Yeah.
Countries have done that.
Yeah.
You say, I was at Side Business School, I spent a month just before I came into politics, and I discovered, right, at Side Business School at University of Oxford, right, that on all their big management programs, right, in every program, the Malaysian government had a couple of seats booked. It was for their public sector officials. So in a big international business discussion for a month or 2 weeks, depending on the course, and then it's not businessmen who are there, because normally you go to business schools, you go to INSEAD, you go to Harvard, wherever you go, London Business School, you generally find businessmen sitting. But some of these countries saw through this. What did they do? They took their public sector and put them in the same thing, same environment. So my point is this: public sector reform is not just only about size, it's about efficiency, and it's about investment, and it's also about market salaries for
and
the
it's
public
also
sector.
about professionalism.
It's about professionalism.
And because in Sri Lanka, whether we like it or not, what we see is politically motivated appointments right across the board, and then it's easy for the politicians to manipulate those. We had the governor of the central bank, Dr. Kumar Swamy, talking about the need to make sure that permanent secretaries are actually permanent secretaries, and he now proposes that the Treasury Secretary is not actually a permanent secretary anymore. It's a political appointment, and therefore the political dimension comes into play when it comes to the management of finances. And Dr. Kumar Swamy is hoping that under these amendments that he'll be able to do away with that. Is that wishful thinking on the part of the governor?
No, it's not wishful thinking. In fact, I think that over a period of time, we can't do everything on day one after the new president comes in, but we are really working on a 10-year plan, you see, because we think in 10 years we can really transform this country. I would go even further. I would take state-owned enterprises, for example. One of the issues is political decision making, right, in this, and political appointments and so forth. We have a plan. We have just implemented. What we are going to do is like we do in the banking sector. In a bank, for example, if the board of directors decides to appoint a CEO or a director, they nominate the person, it's sent to the regulator decides whether the person is fit and proper. What we are going to do for state-owned enterprise is something very similar. We are going to basically create a regulatory environment. The minister, right, can basically nominate the person's concerned. The minister will be allowed to nominate the person, but the minister will also be allowed to appoint the person, but on the basis that the person is cleared to be fit and proper by an independent authority. And that's the way we will be able to remove the nexus between politics and getting the right people in the right job. You see, then that's something that we want to implement upfront, even for state-owned enterprises. I was given the responsibility for a state-owned enterprise, Sri Lankan Airlines, right? And I've been asked, like, you know, you've been given this, you know, there was a board that has been appointed before you were given during the 50-day coup. How come Iran, you haven't really made the changes? The same, you know, chairperson is there and so forth. And I said, look here, the problems in these SOEs are not just to do with people. There are far more fundamental problems. Otherwise, we get into this thing is X appointed it, Y is now there, Y wants to replace X persons.
I'm going to have to ask you that. I remember it is you who said that you will have professional people there, and yet we saw at Sri Lankan Airlines it's absolutely absolute disaster in terms of money and so on. And people now talk rather lightly of it and say, yeah, you know, it cost us $1 billion. Well, you know, that's if you're not paying for it, then that's a different matter altogether. We had, under the Rajapaksas, we had a planter whose expertise lay somewhere else. And it was no different under this Yapalane government. We had somebody who could sell coffee, but not run an airline. And what's the point of having all these people? Because it appears to be all shop, you know, just talking shop. But the real point is that the airline has cost us, well, the Prime Minister said $1 billion. Should government be in business, or should government be facilitating business?
So for us, the point I made earlier about the appointments and the independent authority will take care of the issue you said, that fit and proper persons, you can ensure that they get into state-owned enterprises. When that policy is in place and that policy is implemented, we will take care of the situation. Your question about, you know, should the government be in business? This is the way we are looking at it at the moment. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have Korea, we have Japan, we have Malaysia, we have Singapore, Asian countries who have gone through this transformation. And when we look at these countries, how they have handled it, state-owned enterprises, what they have decided, some of these countries is they have put them all in one big box. And they have given it to professional managers and said, you run these state-owned enterprises purely on the basis of returns.
Will Sri Lanka continue to be a state-owned enterprise?
No, no. So what my point is this.
Yeah.
My point is, right, if we decide that something is of strategic interest, one reason you'll have a state-owned enterprise is market failure. There is a bus route, no, the private sector doesn't go down it, but the public have to be served, so it can become a state service. So it can be a market failure, it can be a development reason, or it can be a strategic reason, energy security, food security, and things like that. You might decide. So if you decide for that reason you need to have a state-owned enterprise, I would keep that separately. And then we know that's a political decision. We know we are politically pricing. We know there may be a subsidy in that. That should be passed on to the national budget, not kept in the institution. But the rest of it should be all handled completely by private sector management. Even if the state has shares, by private sector management, some of those over time can go to the private sector. We have the confidence that the private sector of this country can actually run those things. So unless there is a market failure, a development reason, or a strategic reason, the state need not be in those enterprises.
All the way from somebody who claims to be in Yala, says that it passes on his or her extreme, kindly pass our heartiest congratulations to the Premadasa team. Well, indeed, as of course we at News First and our group do. But there's another question here, and I didn't want to take it, but I'm going to take it because otherwise the show is incomplete. It's about the bond. What do you all intend doing about that? The forensic audits are still not ready. It's almost criminal to wait so long, and the public have been waiting. And believe it or not, the public are aware of something that happened at the central bank. I was disappointed in myself as one of the journalists who kept highlighting this, with your stance actually, Mr. Wickramaratne, because you're a professional banker, and I was disappointed why you didn't come out strongly on that issue, on the bond.
I don't agree with you that I haven't come out on that issue.
You have.
If you look at the COPE reports, so in the first parliament I was on the COPE when that first issue came up. And
did you push for accountability?
I have always stood for this. I have always said, right, that Parliament can go thus far and no further, like Parliament can issue a report, which Parliament has done.
But it's never been debated in Parliament.
It has been debated in Parliament, Then the Presidential Commission has issued a report, right, and then it has gone to the Attorney General's Department. And the reason I say this, Faraz, is, right, that often people look at the 225 people in Parliament and are expecting parliamentarians to basically go through with the justice process as well. There are things that Parliament can do, and there are things that have to happen outside Parliament. Now, for example, right, if once an inquiry is given and on some evidence, we are not specialists, we are not necessarily lawyers or investigators.
But okay,
or anything.
we're in our last couple of minutes. Is Team Premadasa committed to holding those responsible accountable, and for the monies to be returned, for you all to go after the proceeds of the crime, if you like, not only locally but internationally? And it's no good just saying, oh well, we've got 11 billion stuck in the central bank, because nobody's ever talked about the second bond.
Yeah, so this is not just about the transactions you are referring to.
Yeah.
This is about corruption in general.
Absolutely.
Right.
What do you all,
the president,
what does
the new president, right? The new president when he's elected, right? When the new president Sajith Premadasa is elected, one of the things that we want to do is we're going on a new journey. We are a new set of people, right? A new set of people. As I said, yeah, new set of people who are coming in, right? And it's a new journey. And one of the things is, right, it's absolute no to corruption. And we will not tolerate corruption even within our team. Even within our team. We will allow room for the justice process to actually work. This is something that I have talked with Sajith personally. And we have agreed on a philosophy of how we want to let this country actually progress. And
last and final question, because we must finish. Last and final question. Team Premadasa going to be cleaner than what has happened in the past? I don't mean the last 5 years. I mean all the way back.
I know. It is a cultural difference that we are talking about in politics.
Cleaner?
A new way of thinking, a new way of doing business, and having a clean government. We may have individuals, because human beings are weak, and individuals who may do wrong, but the issue is not that them doing wrong, that they will be brought to justice. That's the issue. And that process should go on unhindered, and we will be committed to do that.
Eran Wickramaratne, thank you very much. And on behalf of the Maharaja Group and News First, the Team News First, we wish you and we wish Team Premadasa all the very best, because Sri Lanka needs a new change. We need cleaner government and committed to the needs of the people. Eran Wickramaratne, thank you very much. And that's the way it was on Newsline Prime. Take care. We'll see you again tomorrow evening, same time at 8 o'clock. Take care. Have a great evening. Enjoy the victory so far. And, of course, God bless.
News First, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.